This podcast contains explicit content and is intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Don't say we didn't warn you.
Hi, my name is Madison, and you are listening to Who's Knocking, which is a true crime podcast. Welcome. I am solo today again. It's really hard to schedule things with a third bebe. It's a little bit rough. Hopefully it'll smooth on out in a little bit. And Hanna, she runs her own business and we make no money, so it's hard, but we're trudging on through. So today I'm by myself and I'm doing an episode, and this episode actually, fun fact, this was our second episode that we ever did. We recorded it and it was garbage, so I am redoing it. So, not really missing out much. Hannah's not really missing out on much because she has heard the story. I just rejigged the script a little, and our audio is better than it was when we did this. Excusez-moi. So, yeah. What's new with me? Not much. Okay, recently I watched the first 3 Harry Potter movies again for the first time in a really, really long time. And now I have a dilemma because I really, really want to go back and read all 7 books, but I have 0 hours to do that, and that seems like a kind of lengthy activity. So what do? Do I audiobook it? I feel like I tried to do audiobooks a while ago and it was just not good. Maybe it'd be good if I listened to it in the car. I don't know. I really want to read the books, but I can't do all the research for this show if I'm reading all 7 Harry Potter books. And my kids are not old enough for me to read it to them. So I don't know what to do, but I really want to read them. That's what's new in my life. Very exciting. What else? I got a small update in the Damien Eccles saga, which we kind of are tracking here. But so the transcript, which I was talking about recently, the transcript was for a hearing regarding DNA evidence. There is some DNA that has yet to be tested, and that's what this whole issue was about. And now they got the transcripts, finally, but he's now saying that they've been tampered with. It seems like a convenient thing to say that the transcripts have been tampered with, especially if it's like, oh, it says something that I don't want it to say. So I don't know. That's what it is. But I also wouldn't really not put it past the Arkansas court or whoever it is that's dealing with all this transcript DNA bullshit. They've, they're like really, in my opinion, really deep into like a lie, or like maybe more conspiratorially like covering up evidence, which it really seems like they're doing. So I don't know. Are you team Madison, who believes that Damien Eccles is for sure innocent and like would probably die on that hill? Or are you team Hanna, who doesn't know one way or the other? Let us know. And we'll see. Hopefully we get a conclusion to this, because it has been a long freaking time coming. I feel like my headphones are loud. Do you hear that, or is it just me? I don't know. Let me know. So anyway, let's get into the show here. So today's episode is called The Watcher House. And this is it's not a murder. It's not multiple murders. It's about a house. I wouldn't say it's a haunted house, because it's not the house that is haunted, but it's about like a stalking situation, I guess you could say. I'll just get right into it and you'll see. It's like, I don't know what it would fall under because it's not a paranormal thing. It's not murder. It's not, I guess it would be stalking, maybe. Because it could also be a hoax. We don't know. But you tell me. So I'll just preface this by saying that most of this information, and like anybody else who's done videos or podcasts or whatever on it, usually they are referencing this article. It's from The Cut, which seems to be some sort of subsidiarity, some offshoot of The New Yorker. And it was written by someone named Reeves Weideman. And they just went really, really in depth on this whole incident, and it's probably like the most well-written, in-depth written piece on the story. So that's where most of the information comes from. There's lots of information from other places, and there's people who've done videos and podcasts and such. But we will mostly credit Reeves here. So our story begins in June of 2014. Derek and Maria Broaddus, I'm going to go say Broaddus, purchased the house of their dreams, or so they thought. 657 Boulevard in New Jersey was a large 6-bedroom Dutch colonial-style house. It was just about 4,000 square feet and sat on about a half an acre of land. They purchased it for roughly $1.3 million, and it was nestled in the affluent Westfield neighborhood of New Jersey. Derek and Maria were ready to settle into the home that they would raise their kids and eventually grow old in. Just 45 minutes outside of Manhattan, Westfield has been listed as one of the top 30 safest communities in America by the website Neighborhood Scout. It was also ranked 99th richest neighborhood in America. Maria Broaddus had grown up just blocks from the house in Westfield. Maria obviously knew the area well and was known in the community. Derek had grown up in a working-class family in Maine. He was a hard worker and very determined, and at the time, he was a senior vice president of a Manhattan-based insurance company. He earned a very good living, and the family had saved up and were ready to settle into a house that their family of 5 would be comfortable in for the long haul. The Broadduses had 3 children at the time. I don't know their names, and there's no photos of them without their faces blurred. We don't need to get the children involved in this, but it's relevant that there are children. When Derek and Maria settled on 657 Boulevard, they were thrilled. Before moving in, the Broadduses decided to do some interior renovations. These renos set them back another $100,000. While the renovations were happening, the Broadduses stayed with, first they were staying in their own house still. There was some overlap where they were still in their original house, but that was on the market and in the midst of being sold. But Derek would often go to 657 Boulevard to check out things, make sure they were going to plan, yada yada. You want to be on top of your contractors if you're ever doing renovations, because my God, they will run wild. I'll tell you that. Not that I've ever done it, but I know a lot of people who have. Now, one night in June, while Derek was over at the house, he found the first letter. It was about 10 p.m., and he'd gone to the mailbox, and in it, Derek found a white card-sized envelope with no return address. It was addressed to, quote, the new owner, in thick, chunky writing. It was postmarked June 4th, which was before the sale had gone public. And now, before I read from you the letter, I will let you know that there's multiple letters in this story. It's what the story is about. And I don't think any of the letters in their entirety have been made public. I think that it's been like the majority of the letter with some like redacted parts or what have you. So I will read you what I have found of the letter, but then talk to you a bit about other pieces of the letter that are not included. I think that the Broadduses, it is my assumption, but it's not, I don't know this for a fact, but I think they took out any parts that really referenced their children specifically or named them by name, because it's mostly stuff about the kids that like is talked about but not quoted. But I will give you the very large pieces of the letters that we do have. So he opened the card addressed to the new owner himself, and this is what it said. Dearest new neighbor at 657 Boulevard, allow me to welcome you to the neighborhood. How did you end up here? Did 657 Boulevard call to you with its force within? 657 Boulevard has been the subject of my family for decades now, and as it approaches its 110th birthday, I have been put in charge of watching and waiting for its second coming. My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s, and my father watched it in the 1960s. It is now my time. Do you know the history of this house? Do you know what lies within the walls of 657 Boulevard? Why are you here? I will find out. I see that you've flooded 657 Boulevard with contractors so that you can destroy the house as it was supposed to be. Tisk, tisk, tisk. Bad move. You don't want to make 657 Boulevard unhappy. You have children. I have seen them. So far, I think there are 3 that I have counted. Are there more on the way? Do you need to fill the house with the young blood I requested? Better for me. Was your old house too small for the growing family? Or was it greed to bring me your children? Once I know their names, I will call to them and draw them to me. Who am I? Hundreds of cars pass by the house every single day. Maybe I am in one. Check all the windows that can be seen from 657 Boulevard. Perhaps I am in one. Welcome, my friends, welcome. Let the party begin. The Watcher. End quote. I don't think I open quoted that, but that is a quote. Now, I don't know what specific pieces are left out, but on we go. So, upon reading this letter, Derek was terrified. He seemed to be terrified right away. And he called the police immediately. Now, according to Derek, the first thing the responding officer said upon reading the note was, quote, "What the fuck is this?" End quote. This officer, it seems, was not very helpful. He suggested that Derek bring some of the construction equipment inside that was just sitting out on the lawn in case the Watcher threw it through a window. Derek went back to his wife and kids that night at their original home, and he and Maria talked it over, and they decided to send an email to the Woodses. The Woods, their last name is Wood, so they're the Woods. The Woods were the previous owners of the house. And Derek and Maria sent them an email asking if they had received letters like this ever, and I guess they sent them a copy of the letter. They responded, the Woodses, that they had received one letter like this, but they hadn't taken it seriously, and they'd thrown it away right away. The letter to the Woods made mention about the Watcher's family observing the house. That was the main similarity, but again, they threw it out, so they can't look at it side by side. The Woods had lived in the house for 23 years, and according to them, they had only ever received that one letter. They hadn't thought much of it and just thought it was a stupid prank. That day, the Broadduses went to the police with the Woods, where they met with Detective Leonard Lugo, and he told them to keep it to themselves and not mention anything to the neighbors, who were now all suspects. So it seemed like the police were, taking this kind of seriously. It was a pretty threatening letter. Pretty creepy, and it talked about their children, so that's like some major red flags for me. Personally, like if I received a letter like that, I'd be terrified. It is so fucking creepy. And I don't know, I think I'm probably more aware than the average person of like the level of creep that exists in this world, and it's pretty high. So, I don't know. There's some people who are like, oh, whatever, it's just a letter. It's probably just a prank. It's like, yeah, you always want to take seriously threats to your children, I think. I don't know. Am I crazy? I don't think so. I know I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that if Hannah received a letter like that, she would pretty much shit her pants. I think she'd be scared too. Hannah, do you agree? The Broadduses were still very shaken about everything and were still not living in the house, but they were around quite a bit. Maria was on very high alert with the children and never let them stray from their yard, and she called them whenever they wandered too far. I would too. Derek canceled a work trip because he didn't want to leave his family alone. According to the Cut article, Derek at one point was giving some neighbors a tour of the renovation and was horrified when the woman he was touring said to him, quote, "It'll be nice to have some young blood in the neighborhood," end quote. Although no mention of who this neighbor was, very possible that's a coincidence. It seems to be a kind of common thing to say, but like super creepy because that's what the letter referenced. So they were super creeped out, but kept going with the renovations and kept going with what was going on. But it was only 2 weeks after the first letter that Maria found a second letter in the mailbox. And that was on or around June 18th. So she had stopped by the house to check some paint samples and to grab the mail. And as soon as she saw the small card-sized envelope with the same chunky handwriting, she called the police. The second letter was addressed to the Broaddus's directly, although their names were spelt wrong. They were spelled Mr. and Mrs. Broaddus. So like quite wrong. Now, here's what we have of the second letter. Quote, "Welcome again to your new home at 657 Boulevard. The workers have been busy and I have been watching you unload careful of your personal belongings. The dumpster is a nice touch. The house is crying from all the pain it is going through. You have changed it and made it so fancy. You are stealing its history. It cries for the past and what used to be in the time when I roamed its halls. The 1960s were a good time for 657 Boulevard, when I ran from room to room, imagining the life with the rich occupants there. The house was full of life and young blood. Then it got old, and so did my father, but he kept watching until the day he died, and now I watch and wait for the day when the young blood will be mine again. Have they found what is in the walls yet? In time they will. I am pleased to know your names now and the name of the young blood you have brought me. You certainly say their names often. 657 Boulevard is anxious for you to move in. It has been years and years since the young blood ruled the hallways of this house. Have you found all the secrets it holds yet? Will the young blood play in the basement, or are they too afraid to go down there alone? I would be very afraid if I were them. It is far away from the rest of the house. If you were upstairs, you would never hear them scream. Will they sleep in the attic, or will you all sleep on the second floor? Who has the bedrooms facing the street? I know as soon as you move in, it will help me to know who is in which bedroom. Then I can plan better. All of the windows and doors in 657 Boulevard allow me to watch you and track you as you move through the house. Who am I? I am the Watcher, and have been in control of 657 Boulevard for the better part of 2 decades now. The Woods family turned it over to you. It was their time to move on and kindly sold it when I asked them to. I pass by many times a day. 657 Boulevard is my job, my life, my obsession. And now you are too, Broaddus family. Welcome to the product of your greed. Greed is what brought the past 3 families to 657 Boulevard, and now it has brought you to me. Have a happy move-in day. You know I'll be watching. The Watcher. End quote. Goddamn. Okay, so that's creepy as fuck, first of all. Second, there's a very important part of that letter that was left out, and that was the place that it mentioned the children's actual names. And there was also a part where the writer mentioned seeing one of the kids, one of the daughters, painting on an easel outside in an enclosed porch. And I know that there's a quote that says, "Is she the artist in the family?" End quote. And so this, like, that specifically was a very frightening part of the letter. And I think that letter is way even more scarier than the first one, because now there's a pattern. Now there's 2 letters. And now they're mentioning the children by name, getting a lot more specific and quite a bit more threatening, I think. And to me, it sounds like it's got an air of resentment. It seems like it's coming from somebody who's like resenting who they perceive as like wealthy, maybe elite people. And that is, to me, like that's like this really, really horrible actions can stem, I think, from resentment. It's like it's a scary emotion. Is that an emotion? Or whatever. It's just, it is creepy. So there was really only one house that they figured could see into this exact spot that they talked about where the daughter was painting on her easel. And that house was home to the Langfords. Now, the Langfords were considered a bit of an odd family. They had lived in the neighborhood for a very long time, which matched up to what the Watcher had been talking about their family observing the house since the early 1900s. The Langford family consisted of Peggy Langford, age 90, and several of her adult children, all in their 60s. Richard Langford, who was Peggy's husband, had died 12 years before. And that timeline seemed to match up with the Watcher's timeline, and we were talking about his dad and whatever. Now, the first one to come under suspicion was Michael Langford. He was described as a bit odd, and a neighbor at a barbecue had compared him to Boo Radley, which is where Derek's initial entry began. And it was also said that Michael Langford had been diagnosed with schizophrenia. I don't know how substantiated that claim is, but that's the type of odd, quote unquote, that we are dealing with here. And like, apparently he would be caught like wandering through people's backyards, but I think most people thought he was basically harmless. Now, Michael was interviewed by detectives a number of times, but with no evidence of any kind and no confession, Detective Lugo and his team were at a loss. Neighbors and people who knew Michael didn't believe he would have had the capacity to write these letters. So I think that stems from like his mental health issues. I think, he seemed out of it in some way. At this point, with little help from the police and no other leads, the Broadduses began to investigate on their own. Derek grew obsessed. He studied the neighborhood, learning who everyone was and how long they'd lived there, who was close enough to hear Maria shouting the nicknames of their children, who could see into their home, etc. They hired a private detective and ex-FBI agent, and according to the Cut article, this woman was an FBI lady who the character Clarice Starling in Silence of the Lambs was based off of. And I didn't mention who it was, but I think it might be Candace DeLong, who I read was the inspiration for Clarice. Not totally sure, but that's what I think. They hired a second former FBI agent, Robert Lenehan, to examine the letters and conduct a threat assessment. So after studying the letters, Robert determined a number of things, and they are as follows. The writer was clearly very angry, but there was no profanity. He felt that the person would be less of a macho guy, like more of a feminine guy, I guess. There were many old-fashioned phrases or tics, such as including the weather in the greeting, the address of Mr. and Mrs. Broaddus on the front. He believed that these indicated an older writer. He found certain literary cues that made him believe that the letter writer was an avid reader. The many errors and typos indicated to him that the writer was very erratic, and because of this, he believed that the writer would never act on his threats. And lastly, the writer sounded very angry but also jealous, and he suggested looking into past housekeepers and their descendants. Personally, I don't think anyone needed an FBI agent to make all these claims, but cool. That's what he said. Now, the Broadduses were still locked in on the Langfords. Derek was convinced that it was Michael Langford, mostly due to the proximity of their home, and that literally being the only window, according to him, that could see that specific spot. Derek came up with a plan. He sent a letter to the Langfords telling them that they had plans to tear down 657 Boulevard. He thought that if someone there was the Watcher, they would be extremely upset about that and probably kick up some sort of fuss. But nothing came of it, and they didn't even respond. Now, after the detectives interviewed Michael again, his sister, Abby Langford, started getting angry and accused the police and the Broadduses of harassment. Then the Broadduses hired a lawyer, Lee Levitt, to talk to the Langfords and their lawyer. And they figured that if he could just explain things to the Langfords, that they would understand why they were going so hard on him, and maybe things would get sorted out. Lee showed them the letters and the very specific vantage point from the Langfords that could see to the enclosed porch. But unfortunately, This little sit down only made things worse. The meeting got heated and the Langfords denied any involvement and got pretty pissed. At this point, they had to cool off with the Langfords. One point the detectives made in favor of Michael's innocence was this. They had spoken to him before the second letter arrived. After that conversation, Detective Lugo had thought that if the writer was Michael, he would have been too spooked to send another one. But then the second letter arrived. The private detective also found 2 child sex offenders in the neighborhood. As we know, most neighborhoods have a few pedos sprinkled here and there, but since the letters were so heavily focused on the Broaddus' children, it was something to look into. Again, that really never materialized into anything. And then there was another odd thing. The house painter working on 657 noticed that the neighbors who lived directly behind the Broadduses had some lawn chairs set up unusually close to the Broaddus' property, like there and the Broaddus' property line. And not only that, but they had set their chairs up to face 657 Boulevard and I guess away from their own home. And he thought this was odd enough to note. As far as I've read, these neighbors have also never been spoken to, and nobody knows who they are. Now, on or around July 18th, 1 month after the second letter, a third letter arrived. And here I will quote what we have of that letter. Quote, 657 Boulevard is turning on me. It is coming after me. I don't understand why. What spell did you cast on it? It used to be my friend, and now it's my enemy. I am in charge of 657 Boulevard. It is not in charge of me. I will fend off its bad things and wait for it to become good again. It will not punish me. I will rise again. I will be patient and wait for this to pass and for you to bring the young blood back to me. 657 Boulevard needs young blood. It needs you. Come back. Let the young blood play again like I once did. Let the young blood sleep in 657 Boulevard. Stop changing it and let it alone. End quote. Now, this letter, assuming this is the whole thing, which I don't think it is a lot weaker. The writer puts him or herself at the mercy of the Broadduses instead of being super creepy towards them like he did in the last 2. That's my observations. But still, it spooked the Broadduses, which still it would have spooked me. It's still spooky. This stalker was not letting up. At this point, the renovations were finishing up, and the Broadduses had installed a new alarm system. They'd been contemplating whether or not to move in. They came up with a number of ideas like getting some big dogs, even going as far as to put out ads to hire some military veterans to work out in their backyard every day. But everything just seemed a little bit too ridiculous. They bought this house with the intention of settling down with their 3 kids and enjoying the fruits of their labor. A home is meant to be a very safe place, somewhere to retreat from everything else, but as it was, 657 Boulevard was nothing but nightmarish. Now, the Broadduses were stressed out. The house was move-in ready, but they remained living with Maria's parents, and then they eventually found a rental. Derek paid attention to the alarm system at 657 at all times, and he ran over at any alert, often equipped with a knife. After 6 months of this, paying property taxes and having to keep up with the maintenance and mortgage, the Broadduses decided to try to sell the house. Now, this did not go well for them. See, the Broadduses made a decision to partially disclose the situation to prospective buyers and then give a full disclosure of the letters to any real offers. This was not mandated by law, but they say that they thought it was the right thing to do. They knew that had they known what they were getting into when they purchased the home, they would not have followed through, and they didn't want anyone else to experience what they were going through. That's what they said. Unfortunately, no one even got to the point of the full disclosure. All the initial offers were well below what the Broadduses were willing to sell for, and after all, they had purchased the home for $1.3 million and then immediately put a bunch of work into it. In June of 2015, so this is a year after they bought the house, they were still unable to sell it. And the Broadduses were at a bit of a breaking point. They shifted gears and decided to file a legal complaint against the Woodses. Against the Woods. Fuck. The file stated that the Woods should have disclosed about the letter that they had admittedly received, and they also mentioned that the water sometimes leaked in the basement. Then, just what they needed, the media caught wind of the complaint and things started going nuts. They had over 300 media requests, and the media got comfy just sitting outside of 657 Boulevard, chilling there all the time. The Broaddus's retreated to their friend's beach house, and at this point, they sat their 3 kids down and told them what the hell was happening. Why they had never moved into their new house. They knew shit was about to get weird for them. Remember, Maria had lived in Westfield her whole life, and it wasn't a huge bustling city. This was a gossipy, wealthy suburb where things get around. The Broadduses considered Westfield their home, and they didn't want to be driven out by gossip, and they made it a point to stay. But according to them, it has not been easy. As the news began to spread through the community, intrigue began to grow. At one town council meeting, the mayor, Andy Skibitsky, tried to calm down the residents by telling them they shouldn't be worried. The watcher hasn't been heard from in over a year, and the police investigation had been, quote, exhaustive. This only seemed to fuel outrage from close neighbors. If their investigation had been so exhaustive, why had they not been questioned? Kind of a good point, if you ask me. Surely everyone living in close proximity to the house should have been considered a suspect, or at least should have been spoken to by detectives. And most people claim that they hadn't been. As things started to grow more and more out of hand, they decided to get serious. The police did. They brought in a veteran detective of the Westfield Police Department, Baron Chambliss. The first major discovery that Baron found regarding the letters was some DNA off the envelopes, presumably from the liquor of the envelope. The DNA had no match, but it did come from a woman. Upon this discovery, Chambliss decided to steer from Michael Langford to his sister Abby. Abby was a local real estate agent, and one had to wonder if she was maybe a little bit butthurt about not getting the 657 listing. Kind of a good guess. After staking out Abby's workplace for a piece of discarded trash with her DNA on it, they ruled her out as the letter licker. After that, the prosecutor's office told the Broadduses that they were officially ruling the Langfords out as suspects. Also, I don't know if I wrote this down, but Maria was also tested. It was not her. After this, the detectives appeared to be out of suspects. The Broadduses decided to reopen their own investigation. Derek began going door to door with the letter, asking if anybody recognized the handwriting. He also hired an array of people with internet skills to search different forums, even going so far as to look for a hacker who would get into different Wi-Fi networks in the neighborhood. Not exactly legal, but he was trying anything at this point. And still nothing. One strange interaction occurred when an older man who lived behind 657 said that his son had joked that the watcher had sounded like him. And I don't know if this was the man who lived in the house with the lawn chairs, but if that was, then that's a little suspicious. With nothing else to go on, the police got a DNA sample from Andrea Woods and interviewed her 21-year-old son. Again, this led nowhere. At one point, it was learned that there was another family in the neighborhood who'd received a letter from the watcher at about the same time as the Woods. But like the Woods, they thought little of it and they threw it right away. Now, the sketchy thing was, they didn't admit it. It was found out because one of their children had posted something about it on Facebook and then deleted it right away. And then, I guess, somebody screenshotted it or whatever. Now, this piece of information only seemed to make things more confusing. What seemed like the most promising suspect or suspects was a young woman from a nearby town who Chambliss, I don't know how to pronounce his fucking name, who Chambliss found parked outside of 657 Boulevard around 11 p.m. one night. She sat in her van for what Chambliss had thought was a suspicious amount of time. When he spoke to her, she told him that her boyfriend lived on the block. I'm not sure how it was brought up exactly, but she did disclose that her boyfriend was into, quote, some really dark video games, end quote. In one of them, she claimed that he played a character called the Watcher. Super suspicious. Chambliss requested an interview with this boyfriend character, and he agreed. But twice an interview time was set up, and twice this guy never showed. There was not enough evidence to make him come in, and so eventually it was just dropped. At this point, there wasn't much steam left in the case, and the whole thing became a bit of an urban legend in the community. There was still a lot of speculation and rumors, but unfortunately for the Broadduses, the main theory seemed to be that they were the letter writers themselves. I'm going to take that back, Aidan. There was a lot of speculation and rumors, but unfortunately for the Broadduses, the main theory seemed to be that they were the letter writers themselves. The possible motives seemed to be that either, one, they bought the house and then quickly realized that it was too expensive, so they made the whole thing up in order to file a lawsuit against the Woods, which was a fail. 2, they wanted a movie deal. And 3, Derek was trying to create some sort of insurance fraud. I suppose this idea is related to the fact that he works in insurance, because I don't know if he tried to claim insurance on anything. Now, all of these theories and rumors caused a lot of tension between the Broadduses and their neighbors. Not only that, but neighbors were worried about how this incident made their town look and how all of this affected their property values, etc. They had lived in the community for over 10 years and Maria's family for far longer, but the Broadduses decided that they didn't want to be driven out. The Broadduses still weren't being offered anywhere near the amount that they were looking to get for 657 Boulevard. Their broker suggested that maybe they try to sell to a developer who was willing to split the lot in two and build 2 separate homes. The only problem with this plan was that splitting a lot in two... Sorry, and I'll go back. The only problem with this plan was that by splitting the lot in 2, it left both lots just a few feet short of the mandatory 70-foot lot size, which is friggin' massive. This meant that they had to present in front of a planning board where anyone from the community could speak. And speak they did. Most of the people who testified before the board were neighbors against the proposal for the various NIMBY reasons, citing property values, the possibility that they may need to remove older trees in the process, and of course, that it would change the look and character of the street. The hearing went on for 4 hours and ended with the board rejecting Derek and Maria's proposal. I've personally been to a lot of these public hearings myself, always speaking in favor of the development. And let me tell you, I promise you, this was a fucking nightmare for the Broadduses. Let me tell you that. After yet another devastating blow, the Broadduses received some good news. They found a family who was willing to rent the home. Not at an amount that would actually cover their mortgage completely, but I guess they decided that at this point it was better than nothing. These people had grown children and 2 large dogs, and they claimed that they weren't scared of the watcher, but they did include a clause in the lease that would let them out of the contract in the event that another letter showed up. And of course it did. Here is what we have of the 4th letter. Quote, "Violent winds and bitter cold to the vile and spiteful Derek and his wench of a wife, Maria." Harsh. "You wonder who the watcher is? Turn around, idiots. Maybe you even spoke to me, one of the so-called neighbors who has no idea who the watcher could be. Or maybe you do know and are too scared to tell anyone. Good move. I walked by the news trucks when they took over my neighborhood and mocked me. I watched as you watched from the dark house in an attempt to find me. Telescopes and binoculars are wonderful inventions. 657 Boulevard survived your attempted assault and stood strong with its army of supporters barricading its gates. My soldiers of the boulevard followed my orders to a T. They carried out their mission and saved the soul of 657 Boulevard with my orders. All hail the watcher. Maybe a car accident, maybe a fire, maybe something as simple as a mild illness that just never seems to go away but makes you feel sick day after day after day after day after day. Maybe the mysterious death of a pet. Loved ones suddenly die. Planes and cars and bicycles crash. Bones break." End quote. Derek again took this letter straight to the police. That's a scary letter. It's basically threatening that they're going to kill them. But even with this new piece of evidence, they were still in the same place that they'd been this whole time. This letter seemed particularly aggressive and straight up threatening to Derek and Maria, who had deaths with a number of close family and friends and illnesses in that general time. But again, nothing. The Broadduses still live in the area, but not in that house, and that's from 2018. They have new tenants in the house, but they're still not covering the mortgage. And Derek claimed in the Cut article that his children had been teased and bothered by other kids about the whole thing, and is still tense with a lot of community members, particularly neighbors who attended the planning board meeting and spoke against the application. Now, Christmas of 2017, other people in the neighborhood apparently started getting letters. They were described by some as, quote, weirdly poetic, end quote. And they were not from the Watcher, but they were typed and signed, quote, friends of the Broadduses, end quote. Apparently, the letters were accusing families of speculating incorrectly about the Broadduses. Now, they did end up finding the person who wrote these letters, and admittedly, it was Derek. He did it himself, these second round of letters. So I'll read you a kind of long quote from the Cut article. Quote, when I asked Derek Broaddus whether he had written them, he paused for a moment, then admitted he had. He wasn't proud of it. He hadn't even told his wife, and said they were the only anonymous letters he'd written. But he had felt driven to his wit's end, fed up with watching silently as people threw accusations at his family based on practically nothing. Parentheses, one of the people who'd received the letter told me that they had never met the Broadduses and had no interest in doing so. End parentheses. The Watcher had been obsessed with 657 Boulevard, and Derek, in turn, had become obsessed with the Watcher and everything the letters had set in motion. It's like cancer, he told me. We think about it every day. End quote. So that's pretty crazy. He's claiming that he was driven basically to the point of writing letters to people that he thought were like actively against him based on this whole situation of him receiving letters. So I think that particular thing kind of lends itself to the idea that he was the original letter writer, or it at least leads people to think more strongly that that's a possibility. I can't say that, but I don't know, but also I don't know. I go back and forth, and we'll get into the theories at the end. But I'll just say the house did end up selling in 2019 for $959,000, which was a significant loss, especially as I have to assume from what did it start at? What year did we start? Sorry, I'm just going to go to the top. We started in 2014. Yeah, from 2014 to 2019, I have to assume that property values were going up. So that's quite the loss. But okay, they got out of it. So that's the basic story. Also, Netflix ended up buying the rights to the story. Now, when you buy rights to the story, here's my question. Does the money go to the family? Like, is it their story that they bought? Because that would kind of lend to the one theory that people thought that they were doing all this for a movie deal. Yeah, and that would depend on like how much they got. I don't see anywhere how much they got for that, or even if they got money for it. I have to assume that it's them who would have received money from that. But that's pretty much the story. It remains unsolved. Nobody knows who the letter writer is. I think that the main possibilities are that they were the letter writers themselves. And I think there's reasons to think that and reasons not to think that. Two, the only other possibility that it was, well, it's a lot of possibilities within that possibility, but that it was like a neighbor or a random stranger or like another person. And I don't know. So my thoughts on it being them, for just a lot of reasons, it just doesn't seem like it was them. Like, to me, unless they were really stupid and thought that it was going to go really well for them, I just, like, why? I don't know why you would do this. It seems like it caused them a lot of problems. They were out hundreds of thousands of dollars. If this Netflix deal was like a bunch of money and way more, then I guess that maybe could make sense. But the other possibility that a lot of people just don't seem to think is a realistic possibility is that it was, somebody stalking them for whatever reason. And I do think that's unlikely, because why? But also, like, weird, stranger stuff has happened. You don't have to look too far into the internet to find people who do really, really messed up shit to other people. Derek, seems to have made his way up in some insurance company and did really well for himself. And I think it's very reasonable to assume that you could make enemies, living that journey. So definitely don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. Just I don't see any evidence and no one specifically to point to. But I don't know. There's nobody specifically in the story who I could say, oh, I think it's that person. Doesn't the Michael Langford thing, like maybe, but who knows? So I guess it's a mystery, and still Netflix has not produced anything yet. I would love to see what they make about this. I don't think so. Let me just double check. It's been in the works for a few years now. Netflix won the rights to an article from The Cut titled The Watcher. So I don't know who gets that money. That's what I want to know. They've got people to be in, like they've got people to start on it. And it's going to be a mini series. Just 2 actors have been confirmed, and the production seems to still be in the early development stages. Cool. Okay, well, it could be good. It could be trash, but it could be good. You never know. And that's the story. Let me know who you think did this. Was it the Broaddus's or was it someone else? That's the 2 possibilities. It was them or it's not them. And the idea that it was not them is it could be anyone. But I think I don't know. I kind of lean towards that. I lean towards it was not them. Because I don't know. And just by their own description, it seemed like a really horrible time in their lives. They did not seem to have a good time from, this happened in June 2014 and they didn't sell till 2019. That's a long time to be, financially that seemed like a hellish time. So let me know. Hopefully we'll get Hannah's thoughts at the beginning of the next episode. I have another fun story coming up next week. I think it'll be a 2-parter, and it is an unsolved case, a very popular Toronto-based story. And anything else from me? No, I think that's about it. So check us out. Instagram at Who's Knocking Podcast, Twitter at Who's Knocking Pod. Email us hello@whosknockingpodcast.com. We'd love to hear from you. And please stay safe out there because you never know who's knocking. This podcast is produced in collaboration with Lost Line Media. Artwork by August Digital. Music by Matthew Cook.